and welcome to my channel. If you are new here, hi, hey, hello, my name is Meg and we do crafty things here. So if you like crafty things, please do consider subscribing. And if you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for subscribing and tuning in to another video. And today I've got a treat for you all. Yes, we are doing a knotting dangerously. And I'm super excited. Recently, Claire posted a new alpha technique in her Instagram stories. If you don't know who Claire is, you don't know the bracelet queen. I'll post her stuff here. But basically, it uses a pattern that looks like this. It's a beadwork Brickstitch pattern, hence the name Brickstitch Alpha. So this is a technique that obviously would open up a whole nother realm of pattern styles that we as bracelet makers could dive into. So I'm super excited about it, but the instructions, she hasn't done a full tutorial yet, so the instructions are a little vague, and I thought it would be fantastic to do a knotting dangerously. Also, we're going to play with some new string. So I ordered this string in like May, and it just never showed up until like last week in September, and we're gonna play with it. I didn't stick my hand in here until I picked these colors out, so this is a first impression, and these strings are so shiny. That was the first thing that struck me. And then when I started flipping the container around, a lot of unique colors, like this burnt orange, this deep foresty green kind of color, and it's just so soft. Like I can't stop feeling it. I don't know what it's made of. It doesn't say. There's no brand name on it. So I'll try and find the Wish posting and like link it down below. But here's like an orange loops and threads for comparison. I feel like this is a pretty generic brand a lot of us have used. And here's it side by side with this orange no name Wish stuff. This stuff is so shiny, and it's even softer than the loops and threads. Now, my main concern though is it's also a bit floofier. So I feel like we might see some pilling on this or more fuzzing. As you can see, it's already kind of fuzzy to begin with, or maybe even a loss of some of that shine. So I'm really interested to see what happens with this and how it knots up. And if we're playing with this, we may as well try some new bass strings, or rather old bass strings. I'm bringing back a size 10 crochet thread I had tried once and didn't like, but I'm trying it because each bass string in this technique needs 2 strings for knots. Also, I'd like to point out I've done a couple knots with this floofy string, and the knots are a bit chunkier, so I expect this is going to be a bit larger than I thought. Anyways, if we look at Claire's little diagram she drew in her Instagram stories, we see that each bass string or each knot has 2 bass strings within it. So I'll post that picture here now. And she shows 5 knots with 9 bass strings. So double minus 1 and then a knotting string, if that makes sense. So this says 15 wide. So I've done 29 bass strings and then our knotting string. And I'm really nervous. So looking at this, knots happen in groups of 2. This is another diagram pulled from Claire's Instagram stories. So basically you work in groups of 2 until you reach the end and you knot on a single string from what I'm gathering, and you work in a zigzag fashion back and forth. So I guess we'll jump right into this. I'm nervous to see how this turns out. Hers looks really good, but like all of Claire's bracelets look good, so that doesn't mean anything. Okay, anyways, I'm gonna try and pull groups that are like close to each other, but I don't even. Okay, I'm just gonna start because otherwise I'm gonna be here forever. So first things first is off the bat, I'm not really experiencing anything too crazy that's making me think that this is going to turn out wonky or anything. So that's a good sign. I like that. It means good things. It's knotting up pretty quickly. I've opted not to do any fancy triangle ends or anything. I don't want to screw myself up while I'm making this. So I just went loop into a straight start, which because of how I did it, does actually give us a little bit of a ridge in that first line, but with some work and experience, I'll straighten it out before we actually go into our pattern. Speaking of patterns, I have pulled a pattern from a website called Kandi Pendant, and I will post the name of the pattern right on the screen here for you, because it doesn't look like they have pattern numbers on there. So here is my cute fox pattern name. So at this point, I kind of want to address the string a little bit, maybe do kind of a mini review. It's really odd knotting with these two strings, because this string that I'm using for bass string versus this knotting string, this bass string is a very coarse, tightly wound string. It's not soft like whatsoever. It's very coarse, no fuzzies. And then this is soft and floofy and kind of fuzzy. So it's a lot of different textures going on here, and honestly these bass strings are kind of cutting into my fingers a bit more than usual. So I just wanted to point that out. For a normal alpha, I definitely wouldn't recommend this crochet thread. It's just too thin. I find your knots look scrunched and weird. I would recommend like a fashion 3 or just regular embroidery floss. But I thought if we went with a thicker like embroidery floss for the bass strings, that it might skew our knots and make them look really, really big, because there's 2 strings in each knot. So I opted for this thinner stuff. And I think in the end, I think that was the right choice, but we'll discuss that more at the very end when I show you guys the final result, because I do have some thoughts on some things that kind of start to happen here and why they happened, and the string may be a part of it. I'm not entirely sure, but so far so good. At this point, I've managed to get that kink from our very first row out. We're looking pretty straight, so we're going to start into the pattern. And it's at this point I realized that maybe this wasn't a great pattern to choose, because we have a color change right on the edge. It's not the end of the world, but generally speaking, it is a little more tricky to make it look good and proper and not have strings hanging out the sides, all those things when you have a color change on the edge. So we're going to do it anyways. We've come this far. I'm not going to switch the pattern. I already found this one and I like it. So let's jump in with our color change. This could be where things go wonky, because this was the same as using the other string in my other knotting dangerously. Generally, if something's going to go wrong, it's in these color changes. So with a flat alpha, it wasn't until a few color changes we started to see like colors poking through and stuff like that. Now, in this technique, I'm going to opt to use the flat alpha color change, except for in this first little knot because it's right on the edge. But I'm going to use the flat alpha color change because I know that's what Claire knots with. So I suspect in her example of this technique, that's probably what she used. So I'm going to try that as well to try and remain as close to Claire's original technique as I can possibly get without asking her directly every single thing that she did. So that's what I'm looking at right now. I've just folded that green horizontally across to keep the ridge line because I'm not doing flat edges on this. And folding that will give the appearance of the string folding over into the new knot, which keeps the consistencies with that classic alpha ridge line along the side. If you did want to do flat alphas, I don't see why it wouldn't work in, you know what? Would it work? There may be some slight variation just because of the nature of how this is knotted, where it's kind of staggered, but I think you could get it to look pretty straight. But of course, I do like the classic alpha look, so that's what I went for here. No real surprise, but at this point, I'm not really seeing anything too crazy. I mean, everything's working quite nicely. The only thing I could see perhaps being an issue, which I do encounter a bit later here, is either missing strings or grabbing one too many because my strings are so thin. I do miss the strings a couple times and have to unknot a couple knots to go back and pick up the string I missed. Otherwise, it puts the whole row out of sync. So that is something to be wary of with this technique. But so far, so good. Let's check back in when we get a few more color changes in. And honestly, it's kind of at this point where I start to see something kind of happening. And that's in the color changes in particular. I'm noticing when you change colors, it is very, very easy to get your bass strings hung up or caught behind the string that you're changing, even using the flat alpha technique. And also I'm finding, and I don't know if it's these strings that's causing it, like the difference between the bass strings and the knotting strings, but I'm finding it very difficult to get the knots right flush against the line before it the way I normally like to. And I don't know, it seems to happen particularly in the color changes, and I don't know if that is, like I said, because of the strings. Maybe it's just because there's a difference in how thin the bass strings are and how thick the knotting strings are, or if it's just the nature of the beast, like pulling two strings from two separate knots and then knotting around them. Can you ever really get right flush up against the next row? I'm not entirely sure, and it's hard to tell with the couple that Claire has posted on her Instagram, because she typically uses bass strings that are the same color as her background color. So I don't know if that kind of makes the difference or not. I really don't know what's going on. So I am finding myself pulling tighter and tighter in these color changes, trying to remedy that. And I don't quite get it perfect, to be completely honest. It's just, I don't know what it is. It still turns out okay. And nothing is really warping really wonky, and it's not super, super noticeable, especially not from afar. When we do the close-up and you're looking at it closely, you'll be able to see it much easier. But for now, that's kind of the insight that I'm finding. It may very well have something to do with the string I'm using, like I said. But other than that, everything seems to be knotting up pretty normally, honestly. I was expecting to maybe have more issues with deciphering her message, but it's her kind of quick synopsis of the technique, but it's actually quite straightforward when you sit down and just try to do exactly what she said. So I think she actually did a good job without even doing a picture tutorial or anything. So I'm finding this quite interesting. I'm not sure how to feel about it one way or the other. It kind of seems a lot like a regular alpha to me, but we'll see how the rest of this plays out. And at this point, I wanted to try something different. I was experiencing some issues with my bass strings poking through. It seemed to be particularly at the color change areas, so I opted to try and change my color changing technique to a regular color change. Now, I was really nervous to do this because if you guys remember in the flat alpha knotting dangerously, making that change really warped the bracelet width-wise. So I was really nervous about this, and I wasn't sure if it was the string last time or the technique, but I'm happy to say that this time around, it doesn't seem to have warped nearly as much. There's a very, very subtle widening in the middle here, and honestly, it looks about the same. So I'm quite happy with that, but I did want to give both techniques a fair shot in case you guys do one over the other to see if it affected anything at all. And I don't think it really did. We'll take a closer look at the end here, but I did want to do both techniques. So it's about half and half. About halfway through, I switched to a regular color change from the flat alpha technique to see if I could remedy the bass strings poking through. We finish this keychain, let's take a deeper dive, a closer look at this technique and my final thoughts. Now, honestly, from the front, it just kind of looks like regular alpha. Unless you're looking at it with a critical eye, you're not even going to notice that the knots are staggered. Where I think you're really going to notice any difference is really on the back side. I'm going to flip this over and you'll see that staggered pattern is very prominent, and I think you could really get a beadwork effect if you're working in the upside down alpha technique, which I would like to play with some more. I didn't focus on my back side of this at all. I was focused on the front. Now, the main issue I did have was my bass strings poking through in between the rows, and it didn't seem to matter what kind of color change I used. So I don't know if that's because my bass strings were so thin and my knotting string wasn't, but my knots seem to be longer and the fox's head seems to actually be longer than the pattern showed. and my knots in general seem longer. Like they're normally more compact, rounded. So that I think affected that, and maybe how the rows weren't coming quite flush together. Again, I was pulling pretty tight. I was cutting into my fingers pretty good, trying desperately to get them to line up, and it just wasn't doing it. Could also be the nature of the beast. How tight can you get a knot when you've got two strings pulling from opposite sides into one conjoined thing? I don't think it can get super tight, like theoretically, but Claire's pictures look wonderful. So I don't know if it's because she's using a larger string for her bass string. That could be it. So I do want to play with that a bit. I also wonder if 1-2-1 patterns could be adapted to this because of their staggered nature. So I do think that could be a fun experiment as well, if there's some way to adapt them. I'm also quite happy with this string though. It didn't pill, it didn't lose its shine, it didn't stretch or snap or thin, and if it fuzzed, it was so minor, it wasn't even a problem. So I'm quite happy all around with the technique and the string, and I think this looks so cute. Like, look at it, he's so cute. Overall though, I do want to play with this some more, and if you guys would like to see me play with it some more as well, please, let me know in the comments down below, and give this a big thumbs up. And until next time, bye!